Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about the Scythians. In part 2, the Annihilation of Assyria, we will talk about how the Scythians created a distinctive culture for themselves, based in part on their love of saunas. And by the 600s BC, they would leave their homeland in Central Asia to invade Assyria and help to redraw the map of the ancient world. Given that the Scythian nations traded with many other nations, from Han China to classical Greece, they merged a wide range of cultural styles to create their own. What stands out among these influences are zoomorphic symbols in gold artifacts. They include a vast host of beast depictions, including panthers, lions, stags, horses, and birds, along with mythical creatures like griffins and sirens. Scythian artisans also included depictions of human faces, bodies, and sometimes armies engaged in fighting, or groups of men herding, taming horses, and milking sheep. They often included Greek-style floral patterns and ornamentation as well. Indeed, we know much more about the Scythians than the other nomadic nations of Central Asia because of the kurgans, large mound-shaped stone tombs that are especially common in the Altai Mountains near the borders of Russia, Kazakhstan, and China. There, the frozen subsoil preserved the organic remnants of the Scythians extraordinarily well in the permafrost. In addition, the Scythians took great care to preserve the dead using mummification. They removed brains through holes cut in the head, sliced open the bodies to remove as many internal organs as possible, and then replaced them with dried grass and sewed them up. Within the kurgan, the survivors equipped the corpse with essential supplies for the next world, then dug a deep hole and built a wooden structure at the bottom. For chieftains, these structures resembled log cabins lined and floored with dark felt. Layers of larch birch bark and moss covered the roof. Within the tomb, they placed the body in a log trunk coffin, which often contained the grave goods, and outside, the mourners would slaughter and bury horses to carry their masters in the next world. The Greek historian Herodotus also described how the Scythians performed a ritual that involved getting high in a mobile sauna. He wrote that the Scythians anointed and washed their hands, then they set up 3 poles leaning together in a triangular shape, which they covered with woolen mats. Afterwards, they dug a hole beneath the mats, then threw red-hot stones into the hole. Afterwards, they took hemp seed, crept under the mats, and flung the narcotics into the hot stones, so they smoldered and created a steam bath. After that work, they would go inside the structure and enjoy a hemp steam bath and get very high. Supposedly, the sauna filled with howls of joy. In part because of the numbing effects of hemp, the Scythians used it as medicine for accident or sickness, an early form of pain management. In at least one case, a warrior had his head drilled open to relieve swelling of the brain, and then enjoyed the cannabis steam bath to relieve his pain. Unfortunately, the man still perished, but his comrades in arms buried him with a cache of cannabis for a good smoke in the next world. Smoking cannabis became a particular pastime for the nobility, with some highborn Scythians owning golden pipes for smoking both cannabis and opium. Some Scythian nobles prized their pipes so much that they requested to be buried with them. In addition, the Scythians set themselves apart with their tattoos. These designs covered the torso, but also decorated the arms and legs in styles that we today call sleeves. Tattoos tended to include fantastic creatures locked in brutal combat, rows of birds, and even simple dots that resemble modern acupuncture. The Scythian age truly began around the 700s BC. Before then, the Scythians had been one of many nations in Central Asia. But during the 700s, the Scythians waged a series of extraordinary military campaigns against the other steppe peoples, including the Cimmerians and the Iranian Medes. Little is known about these early wars, which raged around the time of the first Olympic Games and the resurgence of the Assyrian Empire. Most likely, these wars started over control of trade routes on the plains along with the best grazing grounds. In the end, the military skills and mobility perfected by the Scythians allowed them to see off their fellow nomads. One of those rivals, the Iranian Medes, would eventually make their way into Southwest Asia, where they would eventually become a key part of the Persian Empire. So, how did the Scythians use the spoils of war? Like many other cultures, the Scythians feasted and drank. Indeed, feasting served as an important part of funerary ceremonies, but eventually chieftains extended it to build a sense of military fraternity between themselves and their men, holding feasts before and after battles. The Scythians had a reputation as milk drinkers among the Greeks and the Persians, with the nations of the ancient world often seeing milk drinking as opposed to wine drinking as a sign of primitivism. Yet not long after the Scythians came into regular contact with the Greeks, they gained a taste for wine. In fact, the Scythians soon gained a reputation for excessive drinking as they consumed undiluted wine. The Greeks typically made exceptionally strong wine and then watered it down to make it a bit more drinkable. Indeed, Odysseus knocked out the Cyclops during his legendary journey by giving him wine without water to drink. Sometimes the warriors would toast in cups made from the skulls of their enemies, bound in leather. In the 600s BC, the rising Scythian nations went to war against the superpower of the ancient world, Assyria. Historically, the Scythian king Partua married an Assyrian princess in 647 BC in exchange for ongoing friendship with the Assyrian monarchy. While this helped the Assyrian king to sleep easy, it also meant that his daughter had to leave an opulent palace in the largest, wealthiest city in the world for a felt tent on the edge of the map. After the death of Assyria's last great king Ashurbanipal, the great empire plunged into a prolonged and brutal series of civil wars involving three rival claimants for the throne. Egypt's 26th dynasty, installed by the Syrians to be their flunkies, removed themselves from Assyrian rule. With the fabulous wealth of Assyria left relatively unguarded, the Scythians saw their chance. They started making hit-and-run raids aimed at carrying off grain, slaves, animals, and other plunder that could be used in the steppe. But when the Assyrians failed to mount an effective response, the Scythians grew bolder. We can have some idea about what the populace of Southwest Asia endured at the hands of Scythian raiders by reading the words of a biblical prophet who described the baleful nature of the men he called the horse lords from the north. They are always courageous, and their quivers are like open graves. They will eat your harvest and bread. They will eat your sons and daughters. They will eat your sheep and oxen. They will eat your grapes and figs. Few people in Southwest Asia knew peace during the Scythian invasions, which eventually made it all the way to the coastal plains of the Middle East. And in time, the Scythians reached modern-day Palestine and the borders of ancient Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. The newly independent pharaohs of Egypt offered the Scythians rich tributes in exchange for leaving them alone, and better yet, attacking Assyria. And later, some of the Scythians ravaging Assyria encountered the Persians and Medes, unhappy vassals of the Assyrians who salivated at the thought of overthrowing their Assyrian masters and, of course, taking their place. After bribing the Scythians, the Medes marched on the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. The sacking of Nineveh by the Medes marked the end of Assyria as the ancient world's sole superpower. While the Median Empire would briefly dominate Southwest Asia, it collapsed within a few generations, making way for the Persians. However, the Scythians did not only take loot from their Assyrian campaigns, but designs for armor. most ancient armies used some variant of the corselet armor because it protected well against melee weapons. And while the Scythians kept the standard armor, they arranged the metal and leather bits into a pattern similar to fish scales. Not only could it take a glancing blow from a sword or axe, but it also gave the wearer much more mobility and flexibility. Craftsmen arranged the scales in such a meticulous manner that one metal bit covered 1/3 to 1/2 of the adjacent bit, which created an overlapping pattern. Then they stitched the scales into a softer leather base with animal tendons and leather strings. And they would use this armor in their next major war against the Persian Empire. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this installment of the Legendarium. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.